is a favourite spot we get into here, my thinking shack. It's just a nice little hideaway, but I think you'd struggle not to place that in some sort of fairy tale. Well, we're nearly at the bottom now, so the big proper stage set for the paintings is just coming up. Fantastic, isn't it? Here we are. So this is augury actually. Here, it's always been those severed limbs. So this is it. So once again, it's one of those situations, like I said earlier on, that it feels very composed. It almost feels like people have been put together, like there's going to be a play here or something. That suddenly all the actors are going to arrive. But it's full of drama. It's full of drama. It's like something has happened or is happening. It's an absolute go-to, and I kind of think I've exhausted this now and I'm not going to draw that again, and then I find myself down here again drawing it again, the same drawing, and I've got thousands of them, but I just keep drawing them, keep doing it. As I'm preparing for the show, obviously I'm coming across some of those drawings and it's just making me think, oh, I've not done that enough yet, that's not finished, which is actually quite an exhausting thought, that I'm going to go through those paintings all over again. You sometimes hope that you're closing the door on it. You're like, done it, don't have to draw that again. But maybe some themes become so rich in meaning that you just keep, well, it always feels like the first time over and over again. It's a nice feeling. That it's quite reassuring that you might have found a totem. You end up sort of standing here having kind of, I don't know, revelatory types of experiences, and there's sort of things that you have alone really. But if inspiration is more than just a word, I think inspiration is a sort of a dynamic pulling of the trigger. Inspiration should catapult you into work. It's not just, oh, I feel a bit inspired. I mean, I like the type of inspiration. I like to drink it neat. I want to feel, the sort of thing that makes you drop to your knees and think, oh my God, I'm a bit like that, I suppose. Definitely known for being a bit dramatic by people that know me well, but you sort of use that kind of drama to get you to the studio, to get you really revved up. I don't think that's a problem, and I think that's the way it works for me. It's not an academic, cool-headed process. It's quite a hot-headed or hot-hearted kind of process. It's that sort of thing about working isn't necessarily the same thing as output. It can be a sort of neurotic state of fidgeting. Work should be decisive, and your inspiration should be of a type that drives you into decisiveness. It's not, you want to try and avoid the neurosis of the process. It's not fiddling. You're not fiddling, you're striking out. I mean, you see that in the way that I paint, really. I want to get the thickest brush with the thickest paint and draw the thickest line, because somehow that gives me a sense of certainty. That's my anchor, and if I can reduce something to a motif that is all trees, so if you can kind of get that in a motif, I'm always in search of that reduction, or taking it down to some essence. Sometimes if I get the birds to fly, sometimes they know we're here now, but I can do it on my own. So in that painting with the birds flying, when I can be here on my own and I clap my hands, the birds leave the trees and they fly that way, or often, and come up. And that's what, the big picture with the birds flying through the woods. Yeah. It's that encrypted in the simplest little scene are all sorts of metaphors and there's a symbolic language. Flying through trees is precarious. So flight is freedom, but flying through trees is precarious. So it's that kind of just playing around with that little on-off switch between something that represents one thing, juxtaposed a thing which might in some way be limiting that thing. So there's a sort of a peril. There's a potential peril there, which is the trigger that gives it the meaning. I mean, the more and more I talk about it, I realise that that's in the work a lot, that the fox and the hare. And there's an element of peril, there's an element of something just switching from one state to another. The interest is actually that point, that tipping point between it being a thing and another thing. And in life, I suppose, that life tipping into death, or I'm not trying to make that hugely tragic. It's just that's what life is about. It's about constant tipping points. Like the photographer who's waiting for that, when to push the button. It's when the most amount of potentiality is capturable in an image. So it hasn't happened. It's happening, and the viewer then gets that sense of, God, how did they know to take the picture then? It's not after the fact, it's not before, it's kind of, but that kind of being there to do that is an interesting thing, isn't it? You look at all great art, it's about capturing a moment that other people might know the beginning of, the aftershock of, but wouldn't have known how to depict it at the point of it happening. You don't really know what the significant event is. That'd be great. I love seeing faces in wood and turning, when I'm with the kids and stuff, I'm very like them, I want to say, oh, that looks like that, and what does that look like, what does that remind you of? Like further up this path here, there's a fallen log, and I just can't see it as anything other than a hare running. That's how I see it. I mean, I see it first as that, before my brain says it's a fallen tree. So I am definitely predisposed to not seeing what it is, but seeing what it reminds me of. So the hare is looking back over its shoulder that way. So it's running that way, and this is its eye, this is its ear, these are its legs. But it's looking back like that to see who's chasing it. Do you see that? It's a sort of, and the dog thinks it's a hare too. That's a brilliant shot, Darwin. That's brilliant. That's never happened before. The dog and the hare. Oh my God. These are the sounds that I've been recording for the gallery. Just standing here, recording it. Yeah, birds are coming. So, you know that. Of course, it's a habitat, isn't it? The whole thing is a space that creatures live in. I love that as well. There is a kind of a relationship, a very sort of functional one, with very sort of a very effective relationship for me between what I do at home and what I do in the studio. I think, you know, when I get home, I sit and I draw, and it's a very different frame of mind. I'm sort of unwinding, but in that unwinding process, it's very naturally suited to sort of doodling, and it is doodling really. I'm sort of anything. I'll draw anything from, you know, there's nothing sort of inhibiting that process, and then before I know it, I'll have done sort of 20 or 30 drawings, and then I'll bring them in the next day, and then I catalogue them into these sketchbooks, and they sort of add to the ongoing library of images. If you want to see the drawing, it's the drawing. There's a lot in this series, but at first I was really interested in the woodcutter being. No, it happened by accident, that was it. The woodcutter became anonymous. Here's one version of it, where the head is hidden. Then, I know it's a little funny little black mark, you probably can't tell, but that's the eye. And then, a bit more of the eye. If your sort of job, as mine is to sort of collect up motifs and to sort of assemble visual ideas, those little stopping off points and those little sort of gathering the things, they become a language, like a go-to chord, and you know you're going to come across it, but you never sort of exhaust the interest. You sort of think, oh, it's that again, that character. I'd really like to place it in that painting. Like to, you know, mix that with that. But it's a set of characters, so there's always like 5 or 6 repeating characters, and then you place them. I think the most profound thing about it is I'm not over it. It's a subject. I've found subject matter that is a bit of a sort of a bottomless well. Clearly, it's connecting with something. I think it's connecting with something in childhood as well. As to play in the woods when I was a child, and I think there's spaces where you get away from all the stress and worry. So I'm happy enough. Something else I do is it's almost an act of defiance, the warrior in me. I sign it, and then it kind of, if I sign it, I'm tempting fate. I'm asking it to tell me I'm wrong, and it will, you know. But you know. I love the sound of the church over there. I love when you enter into spaces, landscapes like that, where there's certain sort of sets of sounds and ideas that must have always been like that. So we're not, you know, for hundreds of years. So the sound of that church, the birds, it's those little natural compositions that are kind of old, if you know what I mean. I find that that's where my brain kicks in. That's where my kind of creativity. You sort of leave the 21st century, and you kind of enter a time. You're not entirely sure what time it is, but it's just that you're not in necessarily just the present.